And welcome to Rosen Sports Monday here on Talk North Sports. Mark Rosen back with you with another edition of our podcast, and I am thrilled to have with us today the author of a new book simply called Ant, Chris Hine from the Minneapolis Star Tribune, who covers the Minnesota Timberwolves on a daily basis and is a pretty busy man right now. Chris, thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, listen, we had a chance briefly to talk over one of our little media dinners at Target Center before the game. You told me about the book, and let's talk about just the release date. And I want to get back to more specifics, obviously. So let's just talk about that. First of all, is when people can purchase this book, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, June 3rd is the official release date, but you can buy it now on Amazon,
okay.
Barnes & Noble. We're up for pre-sale.
Great.
So, your preferred retailers should have it. Amazon is the one that does, maybe the most numbers, and the algorithm helps there. So not to say I want to direct you to buy it at a certain place. We appreciate all retailers. But yeah, that would help. Pre-sales always help kind of boost the popularity of the book, and so that's what we're doing now.
Well, in a perfect world, June 3rd, the Timberwolves will still be playing basketball, so you never know.
That's right. If they went on a run to like the conference finals this year, and they could just extend their season until, that might help a little bit.
Well, before we delve into the making of and the writing of Ant, I want to talk more about you, Chris Hine, and your background and how you got into this position, because everyone always has a great story about getting into this crazy business and where you're from and how journalism kind of sparked your interest.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town called West Pittston, Pennsylvania, which is near Wilkes-Barre and Scranton, if those our version of the Twin Cities back in Northeast Pennsylvania. And so my dad was a longtime high school basketball coach there for 33 years. I played for him. And so that really sparked my love of just sports in general, basketball in general. So I always said I grew up wanting to be in the NBA, and this is kind of my roundabout way of getting there. And so I didn't have journalism on my list when I went to college, but I went to college, Notre Dame. For those of you that hate Notre Dame, don't hold that against me. And at Notre Dame, I started working for the school newspaper, and there I got kind of caught up in, I wanted to cover the football team. I wanted to cover the basketball team. The next thing I knew, I was enrolling in the journalism program. Writing was always a passion of mine. I just didn't know where I was going to go with it. And so I channeled it into that when I was a freshman, sophomore at Notre Dame, and that became my pathway.
So what was your road like, that you traveled to get eventually here to Minneapolis, the Twin City area, and Star Tribune?
So I was very fortunate that at Notre Dame, I got some really good internships, one at the Los Angeles Times, one at the New York Times after my senior year. And then coming out of college, I worked at the Chicago Tribune for 8 years. I covered...
Big time.
Yeah, I was like I said, I've been very fortunate to have the career that I've had so far. I covered college sports there for maybe like 4 or 5 years. And then I transitioned to covering the Chicago Blackhawks for 3 years. I was on the playoff coverage for one of their Stanley Cup runs. I was coming here for playoff series, like 2014, 2015. I was here for a few of those. And
yeah, thanks a lot for that.
Those were some fun series. I got to know the Twin Cities very well during those. A lot of lunches at Caseta there across the street from.
Can't go wrong there.
Absolutely not. And then after that, 3 years into it, Russo leaves, for the Athletic, and that creates openings at the Star Tribune, multiple openings at the Star Tribune, and I kind of got in that process 7 years ago at this point, and that led to my job today. I was doing like the analytics beat, we called it, once upon a time, and then about a year into that, Jerry Zagota kind of left the beat, and they came to me and said, "You want to cover the Wolves for us?" And it's been 7 years now.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. So I mean, basketball was a passion for you then. I mean,
it always has been. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. From a very young age, absolutely.
And how do you navigate, even before Ant came here? It's fifth year now, I think. To those relationships when you're on a daily beat with both players, coaches, management. I always wonder about that when you're on a daily basis, how difficult that is to kind of keep that professional aspect of it and yet being personal enough that they trust you.
That's the line you have to walk, right? Especially in 2025, especially with different generations of players. You have, some players like Mike Conley, Rudy Gobert in their 30s. They have maybe a different relationship to the media and what media is than, say a Rob Dillingham who's 19 years old, or even Ant at 23. So I think just being there every day, asking the kind of questions that you ask, I always tell them, like, I'm not trying to be Bleacher Report or somebody who's going to make an Instagram meme or get a gotcha kind of quote. Like, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts, hearing your stories off the court. And then, sometimes you have to ask them tough questions about what happened on the court, but you hope that you've built up enough credibility and respect and trust that when you do have to ask those tougher questions, or what happened, or what's going on with the team in this 5-game losing streak, or things like that, that they have enough trust in you to answer your questions, know that you're coming from a good place, that you're trying to do your job, and that ultimately you're not just out always to, maybe write a negative story or something like that, that you care about them as people as well.
How active are you on social media? And I ask the question because everybody, as you just mentioned, either is a Bleacher Report, a blog, they're on X, they're on whatever, the Instagram, and everyone has an opinion, and everybody has a way of expressing their opinions about the Timberwolves, let's just say, and you have your own job to do. So do you just ignore all the noise over there and just do your job and hope that's enough?
I'm on social media a lot, like Twitter, Blue Sky.
Yep.
I try to post there. Instagram for me is more personal than professional. Same with Facebook. So really Twitter and Blue Sky. And I think they serve a purpose. I think you get at least a little bit of a pulse of what fans are thinking. I think you also have to keep in mind that it's not the totality of what the fan base is thinking, or, because I don't know how many people, let's say of 18,000 people that are in Target Center or whatever, how many of those people are very active Twitter users?
Not many.
Not many. So that's kind of what you have to fight sometimes when you're on social media, is thinking that the couple of hundred of people or that are in your mentions or whatever, that represents the fan base as a whole. It's not true, but they do represent a segment of the fan base, and they're obviously going to be potentially consumers of what you write because they are so devout and passionate about the team. So you want to take what they have to say seriously, obviously.
I know throughout my career, I had many people come up to me and say, how can I get a job like yours? How can I get a job where I can go to sporting events, watch the games, whether it be, any of the major sports teams in town or colleges. And it seems like the perfect job. And there's like no downside to it. I think if you only knew. How do you respond to that? Because I think a lot of people would love to have your job. I know what that feels like. It's a different world than what people expect it to be.
There's not a lot of these jobs. That's the hard thing. I'm like I said again. I go back to just being very lucky. A lot of right place, right time to get to where I am today. And I struggle to tell, like, if I talk to like a journalism class or something like that, I struggle to tell them what the best advice is to get a job in this industry, because there's just fewer and fewer jobs as the years go by, and fewer jobs where you can make a good living and have a good salary. And a lot of people, you have to kind of make your own way, whether it's doing a podcast or a blog that catches fire or something like that. Like, it's almost like they tell you in journalism school, when I was there 20 years ago, you're not the story. People don't care about you. And then 20 years later, we've kind of transitioned into, well, you kind of have to build your brand as a reporter if you're going to get attention, if you're going to get a job, because that matters now. And it was the opposite of what I was told when I was 19, 20 years old, sitting here at 38, that, I was told one thing, but the journalism world ended up going in a different direction.
In your mind, is there a shelf life for being a daily reporter? I don't know what kind of life you have. I mean, during the season, it's got to be pretty much almost 7 days a week. When the season's over, whenever it is, you probably get a little bit of time off. But can you see yourself doing this for quite a while yet at 38?
I enjoy it. I hope that the job and the way that I do it is still around for a long time. Travel budgets being what they are and subscription numbers, all that stuff plays into it. I hope I'm able to do it at this kind of level for a long time where I am traveling a lot. I'm single. I don't have any kids. I don't have a partner, so I have nobody to answer to at home. It's just me. So I enjoy the travel. I'm looking forward to 6 nights in Los Angeles here coming
Can't
up.
beat that.
NBA schedule, putting 2 days between game 1 and 2. That's great. But I enjoy it, and I enjoy writing. I enjoy that every day is different, and I have a lot of control over what I write and what I want to write. And I feel like in year 7, it's different than like year 2 or 3, where I really feel like I've built up a lot of good relationships on the team, around the league, with players, with staff, coaches, that it makes the job more fun than it did when you're first starting out and trying to build that sort of stuff.
All right, so let's segue into the main reason you're here today, and that's to talk about your book that's coming out. And you mentioned June 3rd.
Yep.
Ant, simply titled Ant. What's the origin of getting the pieces together to be able to produce and write this book?
Yeah, so it happened about this time last year, and I'll reference my small town again, West Pittston, Pennsylvania, about 6,000 people. I have a childhood friend there, a guy named Joe Perry. We grew up playing Little League together, youth basketball together, and Joe and I reconnected 6 years ago, and he's now a literary agent. And so he reached out to me. He's interested in doing sports books, and so we reconnected, and we've stayed in touch ever since. And he hits me up during the playoffs last year, and he's like, "Hey, I'm hearing that HarperCollins might be interested in a book about Ant," because this was when Ant was everywhere on social media during that Phoenix series. And every night he was producing on-court highlights and then off-court viral moments with whatever he was saying off the court, or doing wrestling gestures at the end of games, stuff like that. So he was everywhere on social media, and that caught the eye of HarperCollins. And Joe got me a meeting with the guy who ended up becoming my editor on the project, Sean Desmond. And Joe and I had tried to sell a book previously, and it was like a 1.5 year, 2-year process, and we ended up getting nowhere. And we thought we had a good idea, and it was a little frustrating when we got a lot of thanks, but no thanks. So I have this meeting. We have a Zoom meeting the day before Game 7 of the Denver series, as I'm getting ready to go to Denver. Hour and a half meeting. I think it goes well, and I tell Joe, I'm like, "That went well," but I said, "We've been here before." And then he calls me maybe 3 hours later, and he's like, "You have a book deal." And I was like,
"Wow,
get out of here!" Right? It happened in one afternoon. He's like, "It happened in one afternoon." And so going from trying to sell something for 1.5 years and getting nowhere to literally getting this in a day was, it was like whiplash in a way. Yeah. And so I it's one of those things where I say yes. I'm like, I accept. I didn't tell anybody on the team. I didn't tell anybody associated with Ant. One of those things where you ask for forgiveness, not permission, right?
Right.
So, and then, after Game 7, I started to slowly tell people that this was going to be happening. And then we get to the summer, and that's when I really started to work on it.
Well, on the surface, again, we're talking to Chris Hine, the author of Ant, which is coming out June 3rd, although it's available right now, as Chris mentioned, on Amazon in particular, and other ways of securing this book. I don't even know where it seems over. When you just told me the story, I get like, I start shaking. Like, how do I start this thing? Where do I begin? Because you're not going to sit down. You're not sitting down with Anthony Edwards to say, "Tell me your life story."
Right.
You're going about it a much different way, which is not always an easy thing to do, to kind of really get the story on this young man.
So I went into it assuming I was not going to get to sit down with him. So I had to put that in my head of, you have to write this book as if Ant will not sit down with you, because I didn't know if he was or if he wasn't. What I did know was that he wasn't going to stop or try to get in my way of writing it, and that people around him were going to participate. And so I was very thankful for that. And, when I did see him briefly in July, he basically said, and I kind of pitched it to him in person, he said, "Go get it," in essentially like a very Ant-like sort of way. And that, I ended up not sitting down with him again for the book separately, but everybody close to him, Nick Maddox, who you see in the Adidas commercials with him, his longtime coach and business manager, Justin Holland, people in Atlanta that are still close to him to this day and mentors of his. Everybody was very gracious with their time and helping me connect with different people as well. So, you talk to one person that leads to another interview. So that sort of thing happened. And yeah, at that point in August, I went to Atlanta and spent a whole month in Atlanta just trying to get to know as many people as I can. And that was when I started to put it together.
Getting back to your original maybe conversation, if you want to call it that, with Ant, it must say something, again, about the relationship you had built up. Did you know that you had a solid, journalist player relationship, that he trusted you, that was already inherent in the way you go about your business?
I think so. I can't speak for him, but I think we have a good relationship over the 5 years that I've covered him. And I think 3 years ago I did a miniature version of the book for the Star Tribune, where I wrote this big story about Ant and his life in Atlanta. And I went down there for like 4 days, I think it was, and I reported this out. And a lot of people that are in the book were also in this story 3 years ago. And so I built up a lot of relationships with those people and people around Ant doing that story. And I just kind of maintained them. So not just with Ant, but with the people around him as well. And so when I said, hey, I'm going to be writing a book, they were all excited. They all were looking forward to participate. And I told them, I said, I want the first half of the book to be just like that story. We're just going to blow it out more detail, more stories, more anecdotes. And everybody was on board with it. And it was seamless. Nobody said no. And I just had a blast going back, and people, giving me photos and all these things and memories and stories that they hadn't shared before. Even in that story 3 years ago, went a lot deeper with a lot of people, especially for the first 5-6 chapters of the book. And, there's a lot of stuff in there that funny stories, moving stories, and I hope people are going to enjoy it. And that was kind of the first part of the book that came together was that.
Well, before we get into the nitty gritty, let's take a quick break and hear from our sponsors. I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart: Lexus of Wayzata, Lexus of Maplewood, or my good friend Charlie Swanson, and Broadway Dental, Dr. Ben Stein. If you need help with sleep apnea, anything else, you'll hear about that as well. So we'll be right back with Chris Hine talking more about his book, Ant, right after this. Hey, Rosie here for Broadway Dental and my good friend Dr. Ben Stein. I'm a patient of Dr. Stein's at both his sleep apnea clinic and dental clinic. He has a newly renovated and conveniently located dental office in Northeast Minneapolis next to Certix. I mean, it's the most modern facility you could possibly find. Dr. Stein has a great chairside manner. He's nice, he's understanding, he obviously knows his stuff, and he'll spend quality time with each patient. Will make sure they are properly cared for. I want to talk about, beyond the obvious dental care, is sleep apnea. I was diagnosed with it years ago, and I was stuck with that silly, cumbersome CPAP machine, and I couldn't wait to get rid of it. And I mentioned it to Dr. Stein, and he set me up with his sleep appliance area. And it's the easiest thing in the world. You just pop an upper, lower appliance in each night. My snoring is gone. My wife says I don't snore at all, and I get a restful night's sleep. And if you have sleep apnea, Dr. Stein is the best to see as well to help you in that area. So if you want to contact them in Broadway Dental, give them a call at 612-379-2300. That's 612-379-2300. Hey, Rosie here for Lexus of Wayzata and Lexus of Maplewood. If you're in the market for a new luxury vehicle, look no further than my good friend Charlie Swanson at Lexus. Whether you're on the west or the east side of the Twin Cities, they have got you covered with two great locations, Lexus of Wayzata and Lexus of Maplewood. Check out the all-new Lexus TX, a spacious SUV with 3 rows of seating and plenty of room for all your gear. Head over to LexusofWayzata.com or LexusofMaplewood.com for details and to find your next ride today. Back with Chris Hine here on Rosen Sports Monday, talking about his book, Ant, which comes out on June the 3rd, talking about the one and only Anthony Edwards. So At that time, and I know the Star Tribune had an excerpt from your book, which I found fascinating because you have to kind of go back in your own hot tub time machine and realize, oh yeah, it was Gerson Rosas. Ryan Saunders was the head coach during this time, and it really does spark and like, man, what was that like? And Gerson had a lot to do with having the decision, right, to draft him number one, because there wasn't a clear, concise, overwhelming feeling we're going to take this guy, the Timberwolves, number one.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The 2020 draft was not a slam dunk number one pick. It was Ant, it was James Wiseman, and it was LaMelo Ball were the consensus top three that year. And you kind of could read the tea leaves just of how the Timberwolves were constructed roster-wise. Like they had D'Lo, so they had a point guard. So did they really need LaMelo? They had Carl. Did they really need another center? And Ant, being a two-guard, could kind of fit in with the way the roster was forming. So you could kind of read the tea leaves and say, okay, well, Ant also fills a need on this team in addition to maybe also being the best prospect in this draft. So they went into the process, I think they weren't really targeting Ant, but I think maybe they had a little bit of an inclination that that's where they wanted to go. But obviously there's a lot that goes into it. The meeting, the dinner that they have with him, the workout after they had heard the Golden State workout that he had did not go well. And this was COVID time. So the draft process was a little different. Not as much time spent around the prospects, a lot of Zoom calls and interviews and just analyzing tape. And you don't really get to bring like the player into the facility or anything like that. That wasn't happening at this time. So some difficulties in the process as well.
As a college basketball fan, I don't remember even ever seeing Anthony Edwards play on the big stage at all. It wasn't like Cooper Flagg. I mean, he wasn't like he had his moment like, oh man, this guy's going to be a surefire number one pick. Yeah. I've heard of him, but I really didn't know much about him. Then I keep hearing that he wants to play football.
He didn't want to play football. I mean, he gave up football at about 14 and he focused on basketball. Football was not in the picture. But to your point, there was no NCAA tournament that year. Right. Georgia wouldn't have made it even if there was because COVID canceled it. They did not have a good SEC year that year. Ant's most memorable college game was this game he had against Michigan State in the Maui Invitational, and that was the film that everybody latched onto to say this is what this guy could be at the NBA level. He had a great game against Michigan State, but there was a lot of uncertainty still going into the draft process. I think he was I think he was like 29% from 3-point range during his year at Georgia. The knock on him was, will he ever develop a consistent shot? Which sitting here 5 years later and he's the NBA 3-point champion, he certainly proved the doubters wrong on that one. And the other knock was, does he love basketball? And I think the first half of the book is going to really dispel that because there was a lot of people, whether it's people from high school, AAU, Georgia, and people close to him who just couldn't believe that was one of the knocks on Ant as he was coming out of the draft because he was always in the gym. He loved basketball. He loved his teammates. He always put in the work. And that was puzzling to a lot of people in his life when that came out during the draft process.
Anthony had a lot of personal dismay going. He lost his mom right at a young age, his grandmother, and people he was very, very close with. How much did that affect the person he is today?
A lot. You know, his mother was his ultimate cheerleader, as a lot of people told me. You know, that's her pride and joy. She was always at his games, football, basketball. His grandmother, Shirley, when she wasn't battling off and on cancer herself, was always there as well. They always made the trips, no matter what was going on in their lives. They always made the trips wherever they were playing football or basketball to go support Ant. And, you know, I think the positivity you see coming from him, the smile that he always has on his face, that was what a lot of people told me his mother was like. And so I think that's where he gets that from. And Shirley as well, his grandmother, same way, positive. His brother said, you know, a few years ago when I talked to him, never seen her have a bad day, you know, always smiling. And I think that's where that part of his personality comes from and stays with him. His mom always gave him a lot of confidence as well. I think one of his friends told me Ant could be 0 for 12 and could be totally wrong in his decision making or something like that. And she's always going to be up there encouraging him. So I think that confidence also comes from her. And that's what you see in his personality. That's how they live on in him is through his positivity and, his demeanor.
And it seemed like, Chris, that personality had a lot to do with the ultimate decision of Gerson Rosas, Ryan Saunders, selecting him number one. Beyond what they saw on tape, beyond what they saw in person, was that he convinced him, I'm your guy.
Yep.
That he wanted to come to Minnesota.
And that was the moment in the dinner where Gerson asked him, like, are you going to be one of these guys that just wants to cash the paycheck and live the lifestyle, or do you want to really work hard and win? And Gerson said that's when Ant opened up and said, I've been through the worst in life, and I really want this. This would be an honor to be the number one pick, and I'm going to work hard every day. I'm going to come in with a smile on my face because, this is what I want. This is what I work for. And this is what he's spent the last several years of his life trying to build up to. And Gerson and Ryan, I interviewed them separately for the book, and they both said that moment was like huge for them and very touching and very moving if you experienced it in person. I didn't even mention it to either of them. I said, what was the one moment during the draft process that really said, this is the guy? And they both said that exact moment at the dinner in Los Angeles. And so in their minds, I think maybe with that answer, Ant cemented his status as long as he didn't mess up the workout the next day, which he didn't. That was really where Ant, the person, convinced them that this is who they can put the franchise in the hands of.
And was that something that was also you heard a lot about when talking to his friends and people closest to him when you went and did your research down in Atlanta? I mean, in the Georgia area?
Yeah, I think when his mother and grandmother passed away, I think that's when a lot of people attribute the work ethic really ticking up. And that's when he gets in the gym and, there's, maybe an unspoken, I got to try to make it for my family kind of thing happening with Ant, right? And he recognizes that he's got the potential. He starts shooting up the recruiting rankings. And listen, it's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure to have at 15, 16 years old. And he dealt with it amazingly. Sometimes that meant schoolwork went off to the side a little bit, as you'll read, especially in the chapter about his high school years. But when basketball is going to be your job, essentially, that's what you have to focus on, and that's what he did during his high school years, and it paid off because look where he is now.
Kevin Garnett, when he was here, and even in his ultimate, heyday here, All-Star years, he had a group of really close friends that he trusted, and I think generally speaking, as time went on, the bigger Kevin got, the harder it was to probably for me to kind of reach out to him and really kind of get to him. Anthony had some really loyal friends that he relies on for not just friendship, but for advice and to be that kind of like, okay, am I handling this okay?
He has a core group of people that have been in his life since he was a teenager. There's not a lot of people that have kind of entered that orbit since he's made it to the NBA. He has his people. He trusts them. They've had his best interests at heart since he was 15, 16. Sometimes his uncle Drew, for instance, was not really his uncle, but you see him in starting five. Drew has been in Ant's life since Ant was like 6, 7, playing youth football with his son. And, there's people that, go way back with Ant in that sense. And he still keeps them close because they've always looked out for him. They haven't wanted anything from him. They haven't been trying to gain an advantage by being in his life. There have been people that have done that before and they're no longer in Ant's life. He has an innate sense to read people. And that's something that a lot of his associates in the book marvel at. Even when he was 14, 15, like, this person could be good for me. This person's not. And he kind of had that feel, even at that young of an age, to have the emotional intelligence to figure that out.
Are there one or two current players that he's closest with as teammates, and not just as far as on the court, but off the court, that he trusts?
I'm not 100% certain about that, but I think just Jaden and Nas, they've been together. Jaden and he were in the same draft class. Nas was here before Ant even got here. So they've been just teammates the longest. Ant and Carl had a good relationship as well. Ant and Mike, Mike is always, Mike Conley is always in Ant's ear, able to tell him things that, not that other teammates couldn't tell, but like Mike has the experience and the over 15 years of knowledge in the NBA to draw from to help Ant navigate the game. And you talk to like Kyle Anderson, I talked to him for the book, and Slow-mo, he was great. And, he says Ant is one of his favorite teammates he's ever had because he's always inclusive. He doesn't want anybody to feel left out, no matter who it is, whether it's, a two-way player or somebody who's making a max contract. Like, everybody's included. Everybody feels like they're important and, essential to him and essential to the team. And it makes people feel that when he walks into the facility every day. And that's one of the ways in which he's a leader, even though he's been reluctant to embrace kind of a leadership voice because he's so young, but he leads with his energy. He leads with his positivity, and he leads with, just coming into the facility every day and saying, "Hey guys, we're ready to work." And, that kind of stuff is a way in which you are a leader.
Like it or not, does he have a chance to be the face of the league? I mean, there's some talented individual players out there, but Ant is certainly getting his notoriety, and obviously this upcoming series, et cetera, is going to certainly elevate that even more in a positive way, potentially a negative way.
Yeah, I think a lot of that just happens naturally with winning.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of factors that are beyond his control in his control, but also beyond his control, such as, does he have a good enough team around him to win, make deep playoff runs? I think he's got the intangibles, like the marketability, the personality. You see him, we see all the commercials, obviously. So he's got that part of it. He's got the charisma part of it. I think now it's the winning, and it's the, being a constant presence in the conference finals and finals when more casual fans are tuning in and not just, the diehards here in Minnesota or league pass viewers. It's, do people watch you on a yearly basis in May and in June? That's how you become the face of the league, or one of the faces of the league. I think there could be multiple. You don't have to be just one, but will he be one of the faces of the league moving forward? And he's well positioned from a personality standpoint to do that. The winning has to follow now.
In your research on your book, Ant, you can see it all happening. And now you look at him at 23 and you think, man, this guy has a chance to be not just a perennial all-star, but a real champion. I mean, we talk about KG, we talk about the history of the Timberwolves. Obviously, Karl Anthony Towns had a nice run here, but Ant seems to have he's in a different sphere.
Yeah.
That he does feel like he could be better than anyone that we've ever had here.
The ceiling, I'm not sure what the ceiling is. I actually asked Chris Finch about that earlier this season, because he was talking about Jokic and his time with Jokic, and said you could see that he was going to be one of the best passing big men of all time. Maybe not 3-time MVP level, but one of the best, passing big men of all time. So I followed up with, you spent 5 years with Ant. What is Ant's, if you're projecting Ant's career 5-6 years down the road, how does he get to all-time great level? And Finch's answer was, as one of the best two-way players of all time. So defense is going to factor into that as Ant gets older. And, maybe as he gets more muscle memory of dealing with offenses and dissecting the game there, maybe he has a little more energy for the defensive side of the ball and taking on more, prime on-ball defensive responsibilities, because he's got the physical tools to be a great defender. And you see it from time to time when he wants to take a big matchup, that he rises to the occasion and is capable of making an impact on that side of the floor. So as the years go by, it'll be interesting to track Ant, not just offensively, but defensively, and how he matures on that end of the floor as well.
Obviously, he has the max contract, but you get the sense beyond the dollars, which are extraordinary, he wants this to be his home. I mean, his basketball home.
I think he does. I don't get the sense that he wants to, chase the bright lights of Hollywood. I don't like, for instance, he acted in the movie Hustle a few years ago. I don't think he wants to start a movie career. I don't get that sense. I think ultimately what I learned from this book was he wants to win. And so as long as the Timberwolves remain competitive and give him a chance of winning a title or making deep playoff runs every year, he will stay. If that changes, then I think you have to worry about him wanting out 4 or 5 years down the road. But as long as the team is competitive and you can see a direction and there's talent around him, I believe that he will stay.
And that kind of gets back to new ownership with Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez taking over, not knowing exactly how they feel. But, you obviously A-Rod in particular, he seems to have a pretty locked-in relationship, maybe as a former athlete and all-star himself, that he can look at Ant and go, I know what I got here.
Yeah, and I think, people wonder about the luxury tax and second aprons and things like that. I think, listen, when you have Anthony Edwards, and if you want to keep him and you want to keep Target Center, whatever new arena you have coming down the pike filled, you got to keep this guy here. You got to keep him happy. And that means you got to keep investing in the team and paying the luxury tax and things like that. Because if you don't, then the residual effect is the team gets worse and maybe Ant gets unhappy. And so I think that alone, is going to maybe eases concerns about ownership's willingness or whatever to pay the luxury tax. Because if you want to keep Ant here and keep the fan base engaged, you're going to have to do that.
Well, if things work out really well, maybe you have to write a quick addendum to the book if things work out in June.
Paperback version, yeah.
But it seems like it's something that you really enjoyed beyond the hard work. This was something that, this is really going to look good on your resume too. Right?
I hope so. I will say there were some very challenging days in this, especially as I was starting out in Atlanta, and I didn't really have a sense of, how am I going to organize this thing? How am I going to write it? When am I going to write it? And, so I just kind of took it piece by piece, tried to knock out 1,000 words a day. But, there's just self-doubt that creeps in. There's imposter syndrome that creeps in. But there were also moments where the joy of writing did take over. And if I knew I had enough interviews for a certain section and they were good, and like his high school years, I really enjoyed writing the excerpt you read. I really enjoyed putting that together. And then I will say I got a second wind in early October when I got a bunch of his Olympic teammates, specifically Kevin Durant, to talk about the Olympic experience, because that was Ant's favorite player growing up. So when I got Kevin Durant for about 15 minutes in October, I knew how I wanted the book to end, and that was important to doing it. And so late October, early November, I finished it, and just kind of in public at a coffee shop I was at, kind of just buried my head in my hands and just started crying in public. It was an emotional moment.
I bet it was. There's nothing like it. You think there's a chance Kevin Durant could end up here sometime?
Well, you know what? I will say, read some of the quotes in the book and make conclusions for yourself based on what he says about Ant in the book.
Yeah, they have a special relationship. Chris Hine, remind everyone now one more time when Ant is coming out, how they can secure the book, how they can get it. I mean, it's going to make maybe a great Father's Day gift too, and whatever it might be.
June 3rd, it'll be in stores, but you can pre-order it now so that it's on your doorstep then. Like I said, major retailers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I don't know in terms of like signings, things like that. We'll set some of that up as it gets closer, and we'll see what the Wolves playoff schedule looks like around that time as well. But we hope to be out in public doing a bunch of that. So if you get a copy, you'll be able to bring it by. Hopefully I'll be able to sign it for you.
Well, Chris Hine, thank you so much for spending some time with us today on Rosen Sports Monday, and good luck with the book. I'm anxious to read it myself and get that autographed copy.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.